started getting into the business world, and it just more and more so. Yeah.
You can't do anything without computers.
Oh no, no, everything.
I was resistant to all. I've always been kind of
Yeah.
anti-technology.
Yeah.
I was the last to get a
Yeah,
cell phone
exactly.
from my buddies, and once you get it, because it seems like once you get things like that, you never go. But you can never go back.
Oh, no,
So
no,
you're
no.
Constantly, people can contact you. You always
Yeah.
want to be contacted.
Yeah.
You just-
Cell phone and computers. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to have some peace and quiet, but you always got that little vibrate or the ring or the.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, geez, I remember the days where when you went somewhere, you're driving in your car, all you had was your radio.
Right.
You weren't talking. There wasn't anything like that. Jeez,
I'm not.
wasn't that long ago, was it?
No, no. I'm really kind of conservative, old school, I guess, too. A lot. Yeah. One-on-one. If face to face. But anyway, getting back to Warner Gear, and we had we worked midnights, and like I said, I preferred working midnights because during the summers it was it was cooler, and you didn't have as many. We always called them ties running around, just to find jobs, and so things were a little more lax and relaxed, and it was just looser on midnights, and so I enjoyed it much more so. But as I got older, the midnights didn't agree with me as much as it did, and it was harder for me to sleep during the day. So eventually I had to go to day shift. But I truly enjoyed midnights, and the guys were on midnights. We worked together well, and we were pretty much buddies. There were like 5 or 6 of us, and we would do things after work on Fridays. Usually none of us went to bed on Fridays. We'd go home after work. We'd go out and get breakfast, and then we'd go out and play a round or two of golf and whatnot or whatever, and then do our business. And that was a really nice thing about midnights on Fridays. You got a lot accomplished. You got to play a lot, and then you got to do your personal business. But it's a good bunch of guys on midnights, and we always played pranks on one another, and especially me. I enjoyed putting Coke cups of water above guys' wrenches on day shift, because day shift they were all straight-laced, and everything, and more business-like, whereas midnights were more practical jokers, and a little looser cannons, and we enjoyed ourselves a little more than the guys on days. And I always usually tried to leave somebody or 2 or 3 a glass of or cup of water, paper cup of water above their wrench, and when they grab a hold of it, it'd come pouring down on them. And I thought it would be really relaxing for them. It's hot in there and everything. They got a nice cold cup of water on them and kind of loosen them up a little bit for the day shift. But we used to do that, and then I had a good friend. I always played practical jokes on Jeff, and like I was telling you earlier, Jeff was, as soon as the brake whistle would blow, he'd run over to this chair, and he'd lean back, and he was fast asleep. That guy could go to sleep quicker than any man I ever met. And he always went asleep with his head back and his mouth open, and he started snoring. And so I thought one day it would be really hilarious. Above his head was a little piece of wrought iron. I thought it would be really, really humorous to take one of those paper cups and fill it full of cold water and set it up on that wrought iron piece above his head and wait till he got sound asleep and then knock it off, which I did, and it worked out pretty well. It drowned him. It's a wonder I didn't drown him with his mouth wide open. And he jumped up, and he was mad. He was belligerent. He was wanting somebody to whip. And I was behind him on a work platform, just rolling around, just laughing. I had tears rolling down my face. I was laughing so hard. I was holding my side, and there was guys at picnic tables, 5 or 6 guys, and they were all laughing. And Jeff didn't find it humorous at all. He really wanted somebody to abuse, but we were all the time playing practical jokes on one another. And we had a little thing. They used to use what they call bluing, and it came in a little tube, and it was a gel-like material, and it had a real strong dye in it. And what they would do, they would put it on a gear, then you would run it in a machine, and they would see if that gear would clean up for the next process. And it was called bluing. Well, Warner Gear had to end up lock the bluing up because the guy found out it was real cute to take that bluing and put it underneath doorknobs or on phones. And when a guy picked up a phone and put it up against his ear, he'd have a nice blue ear, or have it all over his hands, the bluing all over his hands. And so everybody thought that was really funny. And I remember what I thought was really cute about the bluing was I'd take a little bit of it. We had these Cushman carts that all the executives rode around on, you know, and I'd take a little bit of that bluing and put it on their seat. Well, you'd never seen it, you know, and of course, when they sat down on it, it'd penetrate their pants and end up on their buttocks. And so I always called it the Smurf experiment. You know, they end up with a blue butt. And I thought that was pretty funny, but I still think it's kind of humorous in a way. But we used to do that all the time. I'll never forget one time I worked afternoons. I got reduced down to afternoons, and this one particular department, bluing was running rampant. Those guys were just, they was obscene with it. And what they would do on Fridays before they left to catch the day shift, foreman on days, they would blue the door handle on the office, and then they would go clock out. Well, one of the guys, I remember standing in the clock line, get ready to clock out. And this one guy's an inspector. He always wore white shirts, which I always found fascinating, wearing a white shirt in a factory. But he was an inspector. He didn't do much work. He decided he forgot he left his lunchbox in the office. So he went back to get his lunchbox. And when he come back, we were standing in line. He got back in line right next to me, and I looked around, and he was doing this, and he had bluing all over the side of his face, around his mouth, on his shirt where he put his hand here. He had that bluing all over him. I've never felt so sorry for a guy in all my life, and I didn't have the heart to tell him what he got into. And finally I thought, well, he's just going to make matters worse. I better tell him about the bluing so he'd go clean up. But by that time, he had it all over his face, down that white shirt. And, that was one prank that kind of backfired on him. And then also we... prank-wise, we would go in the office and we'd take the phones, and we'd take the phone and take the plastic earpiece off and get a piece of cardboard and put it between the receiver and the contact on the inside of the phone, and just and then tighten it back on. And when the guy would pick it up, he'd go, hello. Well, he'd never hear a response, and he'd just keep hollering, hello, hello. He'd never get it because he couldn't hear anything. We have the cardboard between the contact and the hearing piece, and we always thought that was pretty humorous too. So there was a lot of good pranks that went on, and some of the guys, which I never did. I never really did anything where there would be destruction of someone's property, but I know some of the more serious guys in pranks. Everybody used to have aluminum lunchbox, and it seemed like it was just a standard edition. Everybody carried it. It was black and about this big. And well, at the end of the day, the lunchbox would be empty. Well, a lot of the guys thought it would be funny because this one guy at the end of the shift, he wanted to be one of the first ones out the door. He'd leave his lunchbox on the end of the table, and running out the door, he'd grab that lunchbox on the fly and literally run out the door. Well, on this particular time, a couple of guys thought it would be humorous to nail the inside of that lunchbox down to the table. So here comes the bell rings, and this guy, he's on the fly. He comes along and grabs his lunchbox and starts to run out the door, and when he does, he rips the handle right off his lunchbox, and the only thing he's got is the handle. His lunchbox is still on the table. Well, the guy thought that was pretty cute, and he didn't think it was too funny. And then another time, one of the guys found his lunchbox in a washing machine we used to wash gears with. It was hot soapy water, and it was running up and down in the washer, parts washer, and he had a real clean lunchbox. And then another time we had one of the guys, the midnight superintendent was somewhat too much dedicated to his job, the guys felt like. So he rode around on a little electric Cushman cart, 3-wheel cart. They found a lift truck, grabbed his Cushman cart and put it in the trash compactor. Put the guy afoot. He had to walk for several months until they found another Cushman. But they ended up finding the Cushman out in the compactor out and back later on. But there was all kinds of some, and then a lot of times they would take those 3-wheel bikes you seen advertised in the newspaper for sale. They would take them and supervisor, and they would wrap them up in a chain hoist and lift them to the ceiling, and the guy's bicycle would be up to the rafters, and there was all kinds of pranks went on, and I think it was a lot of it was the boredom of the job, because pretty much every day you went in, you did the same thing, and it was monotonous. I mean, it was time after time after time, and you're dealing with hundreds of parts a day. You had to have something to relieve the boredom, and so we invented a lot of good games to play on one another in management at Warner Gear. And for the most part, most of us in good nature and good humor, and then also we found things outside the plant that we tried to do together, like golfing or bowling, or we had a lot of basketball leagues. I remember my dad playing in basketball leagues. Warner Gear used to have a great basketball league. A lot of good ball players that came out of Muncie Central, went on, worked at Warner Gear, played high school ball. A lot of tremendous talent.
How big was the league?
Oh, it was huge. It was probably, back then when my dad played, there was probably several hundred people who played in that league.
When was that?
Let's see, Dad would have been in late 50s, maybe early 60s. But a lot of the basketball players out of Central, hard on Warner Gear, of course they played in the league, and it was a lot of good talent. Back then, Muncie Central always had a tremendous high school basketball league, and Muncie ate and breathed basketball, high school basketball.
So you said most of the guys at Warner Gear had kind of grown up together, so they maybe went to elementary school.
Yeah.
And some of these guys just continued that on through
Right,
the whole work life.
right,
You know?
right. There was a lot of guys. Some of the folks I worked with out of Warner Gear, I went to Yorktown, come out of high school, went right into the factory, and so we kind of continued our relationship from high school into the factory. Yeah, that's a great statement to make. That happened quite often.
What was it like for outsiders? Because it does seem like a close family kind of place at one time. And then what about guys who came from Illinois who had no connections to the community or whatever?
Well, eventually they worked their way in, but there was a period of time they wouldn't of acceptance of those people. Not only in the factory itself, but in management, because back then, for the most part, even to the point when I hired in, most of the management, upper management, was all local folks, people that had worked their way up through the ranks, and had served their time, so to speak. So they were much more readily accepted locally by the people in the factory, the blue-collar workers, as opposed to someone from the outside, an outsider who came in. And then I was trying to remember, probably early 70s and late 70s, you could start seeing a few people, BorgWarner started bringing some people from the outside in and filtered them into upper management. They weren't too accepted even by the local management people, let alone the blue-collar workers. And they got to be where more and more so that corporate headquarters started doing away with working up through the ranks. And I think it was a detriment. Well, I'm sure it was a detriment to the factory, because they had no connections to this community. They had no loyalty to this community. It was just a job to them. Whereas most of the people who worked their way up through the ranks, they were dedicated to that plant. They were dedicated to the community. And so they had a vested interest to make sure that place succeeded.
And just to recap, because this is going to kind of stand alone as an oral history, even though you answered some of these questions last time. You hired into Warner Gear when you worked there
73,
till
2005,
and how old were you in 1973?
23.
What did you do before that?
A lot of things. I worked in a lot of factories before then. When I came out of high school, I had a couple of decisions. One, my family, my dad and mom had split up and divorced, and so I had no financial backing to go on to school. And really, I didn't have the support. Like my children, I've always urged them to go on and get secondary education, and I'm very much college oriented. Even though I didn't go, I wish I had of. I wish I had my mom and dad behind me saying, hey, you need to go and help make that possible. But when I graduated out of high school, you had the opportunity to go right into a factory and make pretty good money, really good money. And so growing up kind of poor the way I had, to me, the dollar signs meant a lot to me. And there was a lot of opportunity to go into a factory. And I worked at Ball Brothers, I worked at Marhofer's, and I just kept, I would start here, and I'd find another job that paid a little better, and another job that paid a little better, until finally I settled in at Warner Gear. Now during that time, like I said earlier, we had a lot of layoff time, and so you'd have to find outside jobs, and I was a supervisor on the ambulance service and all kinds of things. Worked at the parts department, Sears, and so you had something you had to fall back. If you were smart, that's what you would do, and I think you learned to adapt. You realized that Warner Gear was a job shop. There was great times, and then there was lean times, and so during those lean times, you had to have something to fall back on.
I can't remember. Did Rob go to college?
Yes. He went to 2 years. He has a associate's degree. Yeah. Fortunately, he doesn't use it, but we made that opportunity. His brother went to college, and as a matter of fact, he's gone back to college, and he wants to get a divinity degree. My oldest son's an associate pastor, so. And now my daughter, my older daughter, she had no desire. I've been married twice. My first wife, we had a difference of opinion on the importance of education. I always firmly believe that education is very important. Her, not so much. And so it kind of carried over into the children. There was a constant struggle there that, I was adamant, hey, you go on and get a further education. And it was just like I told my daughter, if college is not your cup of tea, then go on and get something, a technical training of some sort. But you need something beyond high school. It's just a necessity. Like I said, my first wife wasn't a believer in that. Now my second wife, she shares my vision for our children, and we've told them ever since they were old enough to realize, hey, you have 12 years at school, and then you've got another 4 years at least. So, just gear up for it. It's happening.
Can you talk a little bit more about your feelings concerning Rob coming to Warner Gear? I know he only worked there for a couple years. What were your thoughts?
Well, I knew Warner Gear was, I guess I really didn't, I hated to see him come there. I really did, because I wanted you always want something better for your children. You want them to be able to earn a great living, but doing something that they enjoy. Factory work, there's not that much enjoyment in it. And I think that's one reason why I got into unionism also, because there was a sense of fulfillment there. Accomplishment. You made somebody's life better. But it was drudgery. It was drudgery. The factory stinks, smells, it's dirty. The working conditions, for the most part, are horrendous. It's hot in the summer, cold in the winter. I remember coming in on Sunday nights when I worked midnights. When I ran a machine, I had to chip the ice out of the machine. It was that cold in there. So it was some horrendous working conditions, but I knew that it could provide a good income for him. I was hoping what my vision was for Rob when he went to work was that maybe he'd come and work a year or two, get established, have some income and go on and further his education. That was my hope. But that didn't happen. So, yes, I had mixed emotions about him coming to work at Warner Gear. I knew that it would, was hoping that would be provide a good income for him, but also I was hoping that it would just be a stepping stone to something further.
And I know you obviously can't get inside your dad's head,
Mm-hmm.
Robert, who also worked at Warner Gear. What do you think his thoughts were about you coming to work? How do you think that changed? How do you think his thoughts and your thoughts maybe relate to each other?
Well, it was kind of strange because actually my dad never ever got me on Warner Gear. It was my father-in-law who helped me get on Warner Gear. And back then you always had to have pull. And like most jobs, even today, usually you have to have an inside, some inside pull to get established. And so it was my father-in-law. My dad never ever actually do anything to get me on, and he really never ever shared his feelings toward me going to work at Warner Gear. Like I said, I was really excited about it because my mom and dad split up when I was about 12, and I didn't see my dad for about 4 or 5 years. So there was a big chunk of time in my life that I had not seen my dad, and so it was kind of like, oh man, I get to, make up some of that quality of time with him at work. Get to see him 8 hours, well, pretty much 8 hours a day. So I was excited about it, but he really never said that much. He never shared his feelings one way or the other about me coming to work there.
Didn't give you any advice or anything?
Well, he just told me, hey, when you're on that probationary period, make sure you listen to those bells, 12-minute breaks and 20 minutes lunch, and work to 25 after. So that was pretty much it. Now, there were some friends of my dad that were really union activists that I got to meet through him, which was a really, really nice thing. They had a lot of great advice. Instructed me a lot about unionism.
Now, there was a family clause at one point in BorgWarner contracts, wasn't there, where kids of employees had preference on new jobs?
Yeah. BorgWarner was at one time a very, very much a family-oriented business, and there were several families that had multiple family members there, and it was never actually held against you. And it was an inside pull from a family member. It usually got you on. They would go up to the HR and say, hey, look, I've got a son or a daughter or a niece or a nephew that needs work. Can you get them on? And so if you were in pretty good stead with those folks and you were a good worker themselves, they would actually give you your family preference.
Was that family clause taken out, and if so, when was that taken out of the contract?
I don't know. I don't know if when I was there, I don't remember ever seeing it in the contract, but it was always an understood thing. Now, it may have been previous to my time there in the contract, but it was always an understood, because I got my son on and I got my daughter on, simply for the fact that I knew some people and I was able to go up front, and evidently I had a fairly decent work record, and by that was able to get them both hired on. Now, my daughter worked there during the summer help, because they were going through an influx of jobs during the summer, extra jobs, and they knew it would be short term, and I really didn't want my daughter to work there. Ladies in factories don't work well together. It seems like a lot of times guys, when women come into the factory, they lose all their inhibitions, and they think because they're working in the factory, they're not ladies. So during the summer, my daughter worked there just for extra money and things like that, but I didn't want, I was really apprehensive about her working there even during the summer. I kept a close watch on her, but I was glad that it was just summer work.
Did she ever have any problems?
I had to talk to a couple of guys, yeah, but explained to him that that's my daughter, and oh, okay. So
Now, I'm wondering more about these pranks.
okay.
Did anybody ever get in trouble? Anybody ever get fired over this kind
Oh,
of stuff? I mean,
well, yeah, there was one guy rode a motorcycle into the factory one time. He had a new Harley and he wanted to show it off, and they told him that he had to get it out of there, and he said, no, I believe I'll leave it in there. And they said, well, we'll fire you. And he said, well, I've been fired before. But yeah, I think that he ended up taken out of the factory. But yeah, there have been people fired for pranks. And then we had another guy came in, and he wasn't quite right anyway. But this gentleman decided he'd come in one day dressed in a shirt and a tie. And he found him a clipboard one day, and he knew the probationaries. When they came in, he said, what's your name? And the guy gave him his name. He said, well, you're laid off. You're no longer working here. So he was sending probationaries home, laying them off. Fortunately, the first guy he laid off went out to the guard shack, and the guard hollered at him. And he said, where are you going? And he said, well, I've been laid off. And he said, been laid off? And he said, yeah. He said, well, where's your pass? Because everybody had to have a pass, even if you were laid off, to get outside the guard shack, and a clearance for your tools. And he said, well, I don't have a pass. He said, well, when did you get laid off and where do you work? And so one thing led to the next, and they found out that this guy decided he was just, as a prank, that he was laying people off, and he ended up getting a couple of weeks off for that. So yeah, there was pranks that you got people in trouble. And there was one time there was a boss that they didn't particularly like, and so they decided that back then we used sawdust we put down on the floor to absorb the oil. So they made a big pile of sawdust. It looked just like a grave, and they made a tombstone, and it read, here lies so-and-so, passed away this date. And it was his foreman's name, and he didn't find that too humorous. Here's his grave in the middle of the hall, in the aisle. So, yeah, there was a lot of pranks that got people in trouble. It went a little too far.
Now about the guard shack, so they pretty much locked you in. So,
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Why'd they lock you in? And
Well, it was a lot of it was due to security. They didn't want you walking out with things, and things had a habit of disappearing out there. Anyway, I remember one time some people decided they would go into a little private enterprise business, and they were stealing transmissions and throwing them over the fence at night, and then going around in the morning and picking them up and putting them back in the truck. And the reason, and how Warner Gear caught them was they started advertising like new transmission, BorgWarner. And so they're going, I wonder how they're getting a hold of those. And so one thing led to another. They go by there, and here these guys got a whole garage full of transmissions. And so they weren't the most intelligent of people. Needless to say, they lost their jobs over that one. And then another guy, one time on midnights, decided he needed a new tailgate, and happened to look around the parking lot, and this guy had a tailgate that just perfectly fit his truck. So he swapped tailgates, and needless to say, the very next night he drives in with his new tailgate on his truck. Well, they caught him also. That was pretty much a no-brainer. But we had it was a BorgWarner. It was you're dealing with several thousand people. It was a small city. I mean, you had all kinds of people. We had the very best, and we had some of the worst too. Very good people, and we had some bad ones. But if you look at it under a microscope, it was just like a small city. You had all kinds of people. We had one guy that worked midnights, and he didn't want anybody sitting next to him, so he would, in the cafeteria, he would sit with his back against the wall and put all kinds of chairs around him so nobody could get near him. I was a little worried about that guy. Yeah, I thought maybe he might be one that came in with a gun some night, but we had some different ones.
Now, Gene Slay talked about bringing in dinners. Yeah. Did you ever participate in the dinner program?
Oh yeah, we used to have carry-ins all the time, especially around the holidays. What we do is everybody chip in money. We'd buy ham and a turkey, and then bring in a side dish. And we used to have some down around the holidays. Was some really good times, and then the company decided that holidays, then they wanted you to work. So we used to. Have some good times, and they got a little more stringent, and until they would just allow you, they'd give you an extra few minutes for dinner, but that was about it. It was unfortunate because it was just a way to unwind. For the most part, everybody worked pretty hard, and like I said, it was a monotonous, boring job. It was dirty, and so every chance you got a chance to unwind, it was really good. It relieved the stress.
It seems like in that kind of environment, as we talked about, you probably had some close friends.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about working the midnight shift. Did you get to pick whatever shift you wanted to work on? Or did you just
Seniority providing, yeah, you could. For the most part, I picked midnights, like I said, for the reasons earlier. It was a little more relaxed, and it was cooler during the summer. The heat really bothered me. And usually I just found the guys on midnights a little easier to work with. A lot of the guys on days are a little wound too tight for my taste. And then you had so much management running around, more so on days, and always said justifying their jobs. But so yeah, if seniority providing, you could work whatever shift. Now there was guys like the afternoon shifts. I hated afternoons. I didn't function well at all in afternoons. After a while, I went to days, and days turned out all right for me. But for the most part, I preferred midnights.
How did working the night shifts affect your family life?
Well, actually, it worked out well for me because I was always my children. If they had a sporting event, I tried to be there. So I worked midnights. A lot of times, I'd get home time to see them off to school. I'd sleep for a few hours. I'd be up when they came home from school. I'd got to go out to their sporting events. And if they had something special during the day, I would just stay up and go to their event. So I got to participate in a lot of things during the school year. It gave me a lot of latitude. I remember about 3 years, I worked 2 jobs, and I coached both my sons in baseball. And so I had a camper shell in the back of my truck, and I had a bed made up back there. Between my son's games or practices, I'd crawl back there and get a few hours sleep or half-hour sleep or whatever I could afford and get up to. But I promised my sons, as long as they played baseball, I'd coach them if they wanted me to. So I worked 2 jobs, and I don't know how I ever did that, but that was quite exciting until I started falling asleep on my second job. So I had to end up giving that one up. But working at Warner Gear, you always wanted something, like I said, to fall back on, because there was a lot of times you would get laid off, and it made you a little paranoid. So you always wanted something to fall back on if you had it. I hate to give up a second job.
Were you just always tired?
Yeah, always, yeah. A lot of times I drive home from work and don't remember just pulling up with in my driveway, yeah, from work, and but I wouldn't trade it. I fulfilled promises I made to my kids, and try to give them not only give them a good home life, I mean financially, but try to be there for them in their sports and their outside activities. Yeah, it was sometimes it was burning that candle at both ends. It's hard. But I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of guys out there at Warner Gear that had been laid off, and but my family was always very important to me, and I guess with me, my mom and dad splitting up when I was young, and not having a dad for several years, it was being a good father was very important to me. Trying to be anyway, and I was a big priority in my life. Try to be a good dad.
I gotta ask you, did anybody? What was the best? Did anybody ever get you back on these pranks? Because it seems like you'd be the guy I'd be going after.
Well, they tried. We had, I probably should tell you this one. We had one guy, and the summer help I was talking about one year, and they hired a lot of young people in, and this one guy was single, and there was this one girl he's kind of infatuated with, and I was telling him, I said, just go up and introduce yourself to her. Oh, I can't do that. I said, well, I'll introduce you, you know. He said, well, would you? And I said, yeah, because I knew this girl. I was the group leader, and so I knew all these people really well. And this guy was a decent fellow. I wouldn't introduce this girl to someone it wasn't. And so I introduced him, and I kind of embarrassed this guy, I guess, in the process, introducing them to. But at any rate, he had the union steward later on a couple days. I get this letter, supposedly from Human Resources, stating that I was in violation of the contract due to sexual harassment. And so, looking the letter over, at first I thought, what is this, you know? And then I got looking the letter over, and there was a couple typos, and there was some other things, and grammar it was a little off. And, I wonder where this come from. So I figured out real quick it had to come from this guy. And so I went to the union steward, and I pretty much browbeat him until he told me. He said, yeah, the guy did it. He gave me the letter, told me, he said, tell him it came from HR. And so anyway, I said, that's what I figured. I just wanted confirmation. And I said, well, tell this guy that I got the letter, and that I was so upset that I took it down the negotiating committee, and I'm filing charges against the company. He said, are you serious? I said, yes, tell him that. So which he did. So at dinner time, I'm sitting there eating my lunch, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy sheepishly coming over. And I can't remember his name now, but anyway, he said, how's it going, Bruce? And I said, well, okay, I guess. And he said, I understand you got a letter. And I said, yeah, I did. I said, I don't know how you found out about it, but I said, I'm really upset. I said, I told the union steward I'm taking it down to negotiating committee. I've never sexually harassed any woman in this facility, nor will I ever. I'm taking it to negotiating committee. I told them to pursue the charges against the company. I'm also taking it to my attorney because I'm suing this company. And he goes, Bruce, I wouldn't do that. And I said, well, I don't care what you wouldn't do. I am doing it. And I said, this is attacking my character. And I said, I'm putting a stop to it right now. He said, well, Bruce, I really wouldn't do that. And I said, hey, I told you, I really don't care what you would do or wouldn't do. This is me. This is my character, and I'm being attacked by this company, and I'm not standing for it. He said, Bruce, I really wouldn't do that. And I start laughing then. Anyway, he called me a few obscene names, but and he had literally had beads of sweat pouring out on his forehead. And he said, I should have known you would have got me. He said, I should have never did it. And I said, yeah, you're right. He said, how'd you know? I said, well, a few grammar errors and things of that nature, but yeah. He said, well, I'll never do that again. I said, no, I didn't think you would, but that was one backfired. Yeah, there's all the time guys, I mean, always try to get me back and everything. And unfortunately, being a prankster, when anything ever did come down, whether or not you was involved, you got blamed for it, So I had a lot of things attributed to me that that I wish I could take credit for, but I didn't do. For the most part, probably 85% of them, yeah, I probably did, but there was about 15% I didn't have any part in. So,
how'd that relationship work out? Did those two get together?
I don't think so. The guy was just too shy. I don't think he was her, and she was a nice girl. She was single too, and I thought, it'd work out well for both of them, playing matchmaker. But evidently, he didn't pursue it too much. So.
Were there many relationships that formed between workers?
Oh, a few, yeah. I met my wife at work, my second wife, yeah. that's an interesting story. I don't know if this will be in the archives or not, but I was on the negotiating committee, and my wife was in management, and she worked up in the control room where they kept, she would enter data and things from production and schedules and inventory and things of that nature. And so we became, we started seeing a lot of each other because I would have to go out and check on production. Also, writing grievances and things like that, gathering data. I'd go up there and ask her for information and things of that nature. So we'd struck up a conversation, and me and my first wife had, we're going through a divorce and everything. And my second wife, Linda, she was a good conversationalist, and we got talking, and any rate, one day for lunch, all the negotiating committeemen were out. Sometimes we went out. I never went out too much out of the factory because a lot of times at lunch I didn't eat lunch. I'd go out in the plant while the guys were eating and talk to them. But this one particular day, for some reason, I think we were in negotiations, particularly stressful time, and so we decided we were just going to get away for a little bit. So we went out to lunch, and Linda, my wife, wasn't my wife then, but she was there, and her girlfriend from the control room. And so she had been so nice and helping me out with information and things like that. I seen the tab on the table, so I just went up and I told him I'd take care of the tab, picked the tab up and brought it over my table. And my good friend Claude, one of the other committeemen, he said, I think them girls are talking about you. And I said, no. He said, no, they're pointing at you. And he said, they're talking about you. So I looked around, and then I seen them turn their head, and I thought, well, maybe they are saying something. I said, it's probably because I picked up their tab, their lunch tab. And he said, no, I don't know. About that time, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and it was Linda. She said, I just want to personally thank you for picking up our tab. And she gave me a peck on the lips. And that was one time I was so embarrassed. She got me. But I could have just melted on the floor. But then after that, I thought, that was pretty enjoyable. So one thing led to another, and we started dating, and we ended up getting married. And then Linda and I have 2 children too. So, yep, our romance was founded in Warner Gear. Yeah, our marriage, and we've been married this November 18 years now. So, yeah, she's a great gal. She put up with me, and it was funny because again, if she hears this, and I get killed, you know why. When we were dating, it was like we would go out to date, and I think everything's going well, and then I would call her up, and there was this distance, you ever feel that? And it was just kind of like, maybe it's my breath or, my deodorant or something. And finally this went on for several weeks, and I never forget, we were bowling. So I called her up from a bowling alley, and I think she was home, and I said, Linda, I want to talk to you. She goes, yeah. I said, I don't quite understand where our relationship is going here. I said, sometimes I think things are going well, and sometimes it seems like we're distant, and have I said or done something to offend you? I said, personally speaking, I see great things for our relationship. I'm serious about this relationship. And I heard this dead silence, and I thought, I probably overstepped my bounds, scared her to death. And finally she answered, well, some of my friends said, never ever trust a negotiating committeeman. Union people, never ever, one of them committeemen, don't ever trust them. Said they're real, how did she put it? Well, around her, I got around. I said, well, she's probably talking about another committeeman. I said, I'm not that way. But that was it. And we would go out on a date, things would go well, and then her friends would talk to her and say, oh, don't trust him, he's a negotiating committeeman. You know how those guys are.
The committeeman had reputation.
Yes, evidently we did, and I fell in it. I wish I had as much fun as what was going around between them girls was saying, but yeah. So, yeah, that was one of the better things that came out of my working at Warner Gear.
So that's something the community is going to lose. It's also a place for people to meet.
Right,
It sounds
right,
like.
right. We had, and it was it was an interesting experience. It's just one of those things that was meant to be because, I mean, everything kind of fell into place. Me being on the committee at the same point in time that she worked in the control room, and so yeah, it like I said, it was like a little city. Relationships came and gone, and there's all kinds of things happening within those walls and under that roof. You know, we had quite a few experiences, committeeman-wise. You know, you talk to people and help them with their personal relationships. It went beyond contractual issues. You know, a lot of times you just call a guy up or a woman up and just talk to them. You know, and they were going through particularly hard times and things of that nature, or bring them down to the office and, you know, and see if you could help them. Because a lot of times when issues arose in that plant between the company and the worker, a lot of times there was an underlying cause. And usually, a lot of times it was a personal issue at home. They were going through a tough time with their wife or their children, or an illness or something like that. So to get to the root cause, you know, a lot of times you'd have to talk to those people and find out exactly what was really going on in their lives. It's something that's going to be missed. You know, all these people cut loose in this community without union representation, and then there's still some issues there with insurance and pensions and things of that nature. They are not going to have any legal representative for them, and that's going to be a hard thing to replace.
You see these workers being able to adapt? You see anything on the horizon? Or do you think that people are just going to have to move away from Muncie and go to Indianapolis, perhaps? Or
Well, I do think that there will be a lot of movement out of Muncie. I truly do. You know, there's a lot of talk about, and like I said, I'm a great believer in education, in re-educating the workforce, and that's great. I think they should, but re-educating the workforce, and if there's not jobs for those folks to be re-educated and placed into, how is that going to help? And sure, these people are going to maybe find or have another calling or a vocation, but if there's not a job to place them in that vocation, which in Muncie there's not, you're going to have a lot of qualified people out there with education but no place to go with it. And it's not only that workforce. I've had folks from Ball State come into my office, you know, and a lot of it is their class requirements. They need to come into a facility and get signed off on. And I talked to this one girl, 4 years of school, and asked her what she's planning on doing. She said she didn't have an idea. That's 4 years of education that she doesn't know what she's going to do or how to utilize it. And it's a shame, and I think the same thing is going to happen to a lot of these folks from Warner Gear, the baby boomers. Bill McIntosh, I've seen his article in the newspaper, and a lot of these folks are getting re-educated. To what point and to where they're going, there's nothing around here for them, and so I think we're gonna lose a lot of people, unfortunately. A lot of good people.
what do you see, as somebody who's lived here your whole life, what do you see the community looking like with the loss of these folks? What do you see sustaining the community?
I see us being a grain community. I think that Muncie, you are going to have the seniors, and you're going to have the college age, and very few in between. I think that's where our community is going. I think I read somewhere we're growing gray at the rate of, what is it, 300 or 400 over the age of 60 every year in this community. And out of a community of 70,000, 80,000 people, that's quite a bit. So I think that's what's going to happen, unless you see a massive influx of course, jobs are going to draw the younger people into town, and retain the people that we have now. If we can get some good paying jobs in, that'll change the trend. But barring that, I see the college age and the senior community.
Bruce, that's really all I've got for today. Is there anything that you'd like to add that you'd just like to capture on this oral history?
Well, I spent 32 and a half years in Warner Gear, and I had some really great times. I had some really bad times too out there, but that's life. I just hate to see the end of an era, because Warner Gear has provided a good income for a lot of people, and it has made a difference in this community. And I think the Chevrolets, the Muncie, the Ball Brothers, heavy industry has a place in a town, and it's unfortunate that a lot of our leadership for the longest time has failed to recognize that. I just hate to see that end, because I think to be a healthy, viable community, that will has to be complete, from the service sector to the university to the heavy industry to the seniors. It has to be a complete will, and if it's not, you have a sick community. It's not going to be very healthy. You know, a lot of times you wish things would be different. I hate change. A lot of it is I hate change. We're in for a big change. I have trouble adjusting and adapting. We talked earlier about it. I'm very conservative, old school. I believe in conservative ideals and beliefs. I believe in the dignity of man. I believe a man's word is his bond. Those things may be old-fashioned, but I believe in them. I believe in the quality and dignity of life, and I just wish that for everybody. And I think with these closings, that's not going to happen for a lot of people.
Thanks a lot for your time today.
Not a problem.
Appreciate it.